In the summer of 1849, along the Platte River Road in what is now Nebraska, emigrants heading west started counting graves. Not battles, not bear attacks. Graves. Some of them kept tallies in their diaries, a habit that tells you something on its own about how ordinary it had become. They counted them the way you would count fence posts, dozens in a day of travel, whole stretches of road where you were never out of sight of a fresh mound with a board pushed into it. Most of those people had been alive and well 2 days before. They had walked the same trail, drunk from the same river, and by the time the wagons rolled on, they were under it. And the thing that killed them was not a grizzly. It was not a wolf. It was not the Sioux. And it was not the cold. It was the water. Clear water. Cold water. Water that looked as clean as anything you have ever cupped in your hands. Now here is what I want you to sit with for a minute. In the whole recorded history of white settlement in the American West, every grizzly, every black bear, every mountain lion, every wolf, added together across 2 centuries, the number of people killed by all of them together does not come close to what Badwater did in a single bad summer on one river road. Not close, not in the same country. And the men who died of it, most of them, died believing they had done everything right. Because they had been taught a rule that everybody knew, that everybody repeated, and that was dead wrong. The rule was this: if the water is clear, and it is cold, and it is moving, it is safe to drink. That rule killed more trappers, more emigrants, more prospectors, and more soldiers than every predator on the continent put together. My grandfather ran trap lines on the Clark Fork before the roads came into this valley. He learned water from men who had buried friends over it. And the first thing they taught him was that the water most likely to kill you is the water that looks the best. I am Orson Rusk. Let us go through it properly. I want to be precise about what the myth actually is, because there is a version of it still going around, and most people carrying it do not know they are carrying it. It comes in about 4 flavors. The first is the one I have already said. Clear, cold, and moving means clean. The second is the distance rule. You will still hear this one at trailheads. That running water purifies itself after a certain distance. 100 feet, 100 yards. Some folks say 7 bends in the creek. The number moves around depending on who is telling you, which ought to be your first clue. The third is elevation. The idea that if you are high enough up, above the farms, above the towns, above where anybody lives, the water coming down off the snow is clean because there is nothing above you to dirty it. And the fourth is the oldest one, that if it tastes good, it is good. Every one of those is false. Not mostly false, not outdated. False. And I am going to show you exactly why each one fails, what actually killed those people on the Platte, and what the old hands did that worked, including one thing they did entirely by accident that saved more lives than any deliberate precaution they ever took. There are 6 pieces to this. Most men who think about it at all get the first 3 about right. The fourth is where the old books start to wander, and where a lot of modern advice is just plain wrong. But the sixth is the one that got quietly dropped out of the survival talk somewhere in the last 100 years, and it is the one that changes whether the whole business actually works or just makes you feel better while you drink something that is going to put you down in a week. We will get to all 6. Stay with me. And before I go on, if this is the kind of thing you want more of, put a subscribe on it. Not for my sake, because the old methods we are digging back up around here, you will want the next one. Let us start with the graves, because the history here is not vague. It is some of the best documented dying in American history on account of everybody involved kept a diary. The Great Westward Migration ran roughly from 1841 through the 1860s. Somewhere around 300,000 to 400,000 people went west on the overland trails, and the best estimates historians have put together say something on the order of 20,000 of them died on the way. Now think about what that means as a rate. 20,000 dead out of 400,000. That is roughly 1 in 20 people who set out never arriving, on a road with no combat. So what killed them? Historians who have gone through the diaries and the trail registers, and this has been done carefully, come out with the same answer every time. Disease. Overwhelmingly disease. And the single largest killer among the diseases was cholera. Cholera is a waterborne infection. You get it by swallowing water or food handled with unwashed hands that has been contaminated with the waste of somebody who already has it. That is the entire mechanism. It moves through drinking water. And cholera is fast. That is what made it so frightening on the trail. A person could be walking beside the wagon in the morning, be violently sick by noon, and be dead before the next morning. The diaries are full of that. Breakfast with the family, buried by supper. What actually kills you is dehydration. The infection makes the gut dump water at a rate the body cannot replace, and a strong adult can lose enough fluid in a few hours to stop the heart. That is why it took the healthy ones as readily as the weak. Sometimes more readily, because the healthy ones were the ones out working and sweating and drinking more. Now, here is the part that matters for our purpose. Those people had no idea it was the water. Germ theory, the actual understanding that specific tiny organisms cause specific diseases, was not established and accepted until the 1860s and 1870s. Pasteur and Koch. That is after the worst of the trail years. Before that, the dominant explanation for epidemic disease was miasma. Bad air. The idea that sickness rose out of swamps and rotting matter as a kind of poisonous vapor, and that you caught it by breathing it. So picture what that does to behavior. If you believe sickness comes out of the air, you move your camp to higher ground, away from the low, wet places. You keep the tent flaps shut at night against the vapors, and then you walk down to the river, the clear, cold, fast river, and you fill your bucket, because the water is obviously fine. Look at it. They were taking careful precautions against the wrong thing while doing the one thing that was actually killing them. There is a specific moment when this got worked out, and it is worth knowing. In 1854, a London physician named John Snow traced a cholera outbreak in Soho to a single public water pump on Broad Street. He mapped the deaths, saw they clustered around that one pump, and had the handle removed. That is the piece of detective work usually credited with proving cholera moves through water. 1854. The worst cholera years on the overland trails were 1849 through about 1852. They died just ahead of the answer, by a few years. Now let us do the bears, because I made a claim at the top, and I would like to back it. Fatal bear attacks in North America are genuinely rare. Compilations of the records going back to the late 1700s put fatal brown and grizzly bear attacks in North America in the low hundreds, across the entire continent, across more than 2 centuries. Black bear fatalities are rarer still. You can argue the exact figure at the margins, and researchers do, but nobody serious puts it in the thousands. And attacks by native peoples, which is the other thing people assume killed the emigrants, the careful work on the trail records comes out with a figure of a few hundred emigrants killed across 2 decades of migration. Real and grim, and far smaller than the picture most people carry. Set that against 20,000 dead on the trails, most of it disease, most of that waterborne. The arithmetic is not close. The thing that everybody feared killed a few hundred. The thing nobody feared killed tens of thousands. That is the shape of it. And it is not just a frontier curiosity. It is a pattern that holds. The danger that looks dangerous gets your attention. The danger that looks harmless is the one that does the work. Clear, cold water looks harmless. So let us take the myth apart properly, starting with why clear fails you. Clarity tells you about particles, silt, sediment, suspended clay. That is all it tells you. When water runs clear, what you are seeing is the absence of things big enough to scatter light. The organisms that make you sick are nowhere near that size. A cholera bacterium, a Giardia cyst, a Cryptosporidium oocyst. These are measured in microns. Thousands of them could sit in the width of a hair. Water can be swimming with them and look like glass. So clarity is not a safety signal. It is an aesthetic one. Now cold. Cold is the one that catches out even experienced people, because it feels like it ought to work. We know heat kills things, so cold should too, should it not? It does not. Cold preserves. Giardia, the parasite behind what people call beaver fever, forms a cyst, which is essentially a hard-shelled dormant stage built specifically to survive outside a host. In cold water, those cysts remain viable for weeks, and in near-freezing water they can persist for a couple of months. Cold water is not hostile to them. It is storage. Same story with Cryptosporidium, which is, if anything, tougher. Its oocysts are notoriously resistant, including to chlorine at the concentrations used to treat drinking water. That is why municipal systems have to filter as well as chlorinate, so the snowmelt stream running down off the high country at just above freezing. That is not a sterilizing environment. That is a cold cellar, keeping everything nicely. And moving water, the third leg of the myth. Movement dilutes. That is all. If there is a source of contamination upstream, a fast current spreads it thinner and carries it further, which is not the same as removing it. It also means fast water can carry contamination a long way from wherever it entered, which is precisely why there is nothing above me is such a poor bet. Here is where it gets specific to the men I come from. Beaver trapping, the trade that opened this whole country between about 1820 and 1840, meant standing in beaver ponds. That was the work. You waded into still and slow water at the edges of dammed creeks. You set your traps in a few inches of water near the bank, and you did it again and again every day, all season. Now, Giardia is so strongly associated with beaver-inhabited water that the common name for the illness in North America is beaver fever. Beaver are not the only carriers. Muskrat, livestock, deer, dogs, and humans all shed it, and humans are a major source. But a beaver pond is exactly the kind of water where the cysts concentrate and persist. So the fur trade put men, for months at a stretch, waist deep in the most reliably contaminated water in the mountains, drinking from it because it was right there and it looked clean. And Giardia has a long fuse. The incubation is typically 1 to 3 weeks. So a man does not connect the water he drank at the beaver dam with the illness that flattens him a fortnight later, 60 miles away. He blames the meat, or the cold, or bad luck. It does not usually kill a healthy adult outright. What it does is worse for a man alone in the mountains. Weeks of it. Cramping, unable to hold food, losing weight and strength through the part of the year when he can least afford to lose either. Plenty of men who just got weak and did not come out of the mountains that spring were carrying something they picked up in 6 inches of water. Let me deal with the self-purification rule directly, because it is the most durable piece of nonsense in this whole business. You will hear that running water purifies itself in some fixed distance. 100 feet, 100 yards, 7 bends. There is no basis for it. None. And you can see it is folklore rather than knowledge from the way the number changes with whoever is telling you. Real measurements do not drift like that. Now, there is a real phenomenon underneath the myth, and it is worth understanding because it explains where the idea came from. Streams do have a natural capacity to break down certain kinds of pollution over distance. Organic matter gets consumed by microorganisms, sunlight damages some pathogens, sediment settles out, oxygen levels recover. That is real, it is studied, and it is why a river can recover downstream of a disturbance. But that process works over miles and days. It depends entirely on how much contamination went in and what kind, and it does very little to hardy cysts like Giardia and Cryptosporidium, which are built to sit in cold water for weeks and wait. So the kernel of truth is that rivers can recover over long distances given time. The folklore version is that this creek fixed itself since that dead elk, too, bends back. Those are not the same statement, and the second one will put you on your back. Same with altitude. Above the tree line, above the farms, above the towns, the assumption is that nothing is up there, but something is always up there. Sheep, goats, marmots, elk, deer, pack animals, other people. And the people ahead of you on the trail are the likeliest source of anything that will actually hurt you, because human waste carries human pathogens. High country does not mean empty. It means fewer, not none, and it only takes one. Now the useful half. Because for all that they did not understand why, the old hands did some things that genuinely worked. The biggest one they did entirely by accident. They drank coffee. Constantly. Coffee and tea were staples of trail and camp life to a degree that is hard to overstate. Coffee was one of the things emigrants and trappers alike carried and rationed and complained about running out of. And to make coffee, you boil the water. Every cup of coffee was, without anybody intending it, a sterilized cup of water. Not because anyone was treating water, because they wanted coffee. The people who drank more coffee and less Cold Creek water got sick, less, and nobody knew why, and it looked like coffee was good for a man's constitution. In a manner of speaking, it was. The same accident shows up in other places in history. Cultures where the customary drink is boiled or brewed have tended to fare better than neighbors drinking straight from the source. Boiling was doing the work the whole time. So, boiling works. It has always worked. It worked before anyone knew why, and it is still the most reliable thing you can do to water with no equipment at all. Here is how to do it properly, because there is a detail here that gets mangled constantly. Bring the water to a rolling boil, a real one, breaking the surface, not just steaming and shivering, and hold it there for 1 minute. That is it, at ordinary elevation. 1 minute of rolling boil kills the bacteria, the viruses, the Giardia, the Cryptosporidium. All of it. But, and here is the piece that gets left out. Above about 6,500 feet, you hold that boil for 3 minutes, not one. That is the sixth thing. That is the one that got dropped. And here is why it matters, and why it is a mountain problem specifically. Water boils at a lower temperature the higher you go, because there is less air pressing down on it. At sea level, water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, 100 Celsius. At 6,000 or 7,000 feet, it boils closer to 200 degrees. At 10,000 feet, you are down near 194. So your water is boiling. Visibly, vigorously, rolling. At a temperature meaningfully lower than it would be down in the flat country. The visual signal is identical. The heat behind it is not. And so the extra time makes up the difference. Now think about where this bites. The trapper in the high country. The prospector at 9,000 feet. Anybody in the Rockies, the Sierras, the high Cascades. The exact people who most needed water discipline were the exact people whose boil was weakest, and the rule they had been handed, just boil it, was written for lower ground. A man could do everything he'd been told, watch his pot roll for a good minute, and still be drinking something that had not been held hot long enough. That is the difference between a precaution and a habit that just makes you feel careful. Quickly before I close, the things that people did and still do that do not get you there. Settling. Letting water stand so the sediment drops out. It makes the water clearer. It does not make it safer. Cysts stay suspended. You have improved the look and changed nothing else. Straining through cloth. Same problem, same reason. A cloth catches leaves and grit and insects. Micron-scale organisms go straight through the weave, useful as a first step before boiling because it keeps your pot cleaner. But it is not treatment. Charcoal. Old and genuinely useful, and this one deserves a fair hearing because activated carbon is real technology used in real filters today. What it does well is take up certain chemicals, improve taste, and remove odor. What it does not do reliably on its own is remove protozoan cysts or bacteria. Improving how water tastes while leaving what is dangerous in it is arguably the worst possible outcome because it removes your suspicion. Whiskey in the canteen. The concentration you would get adding spirits to water is nowhere near enough to sterilize anything. You would have to drink something closer to neat spirit in quantity, which brings its own well-understood way of killing you. And the oldest one, taste. Taste tells you about minerals and organic matter. It tells you nothing whatsoever about pathogens. Cholera water tastes like water. One thing before I finish, and then I will not mention it again. Everything I have gathered, the water, the fire, the cold, the food, all of it, the way it was actually done, and what it actually cost the men who got it wrong. It is written down in one book over at orsonrusk.com. 90 methods, plain, with what each one does and what it does not. It is there if you want it. That is all. Now let me close this out. Here is what I want you to take from this. Those people on the Platte were not fools. They were careful. They moved their camps to higher ground. They shut their tents against the night air. They did everything the best understanding of their day told them to do. And they died in their thousands, because the best understanding of their day was wrong about one thing, and that one thing was the water they could see was clean. The bears got the reputation. The water did the killing. Clear tells you about dirt. Cold preserves rather than kills. Moving dilutes rather than cleans. High does not mean empty. And boiling has always worked. 1 minute down low, 3 minutes up high. And that last part is the part that got forgotten. That is the whole of it. No trick to it once you know. I am Orson Rusk. I will see you on the next one.